The day everyone called him a hero was the day he quietly became the villain in my story. The first thing I noticed was the applause. It echoed across the college quad, rolling between the old red brick buildings like the finale of a movie everyone wanted to believe in. Students crowded around the fountain with their phones raised high. Professors hurried across the lawn wearing worried expressions that slowly softened into relief. And somewhere beyond the sea of people, someone shouted Ethan Brooks' name as though he had just won a championship instead of simply following his heart. I couldn't see everything from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I recognized the look on his face long before the crowd parted enough for me to catch a glimpse of him. His arms were wrapped protectively around Lucas Carter, the boy everyone knew as his first love. Lucas looked shaken, his breathing uneven, while Ethan spoke to him in the same quiet voice I used to think belonged only to me. Around them, whispers spread faster than the spring breeze. He never hesitated. He ran the second he saw Lucas. That's real love. Every sentence landed heavier than the last. Nobody noticed me standing only a few yards away beside the art exhibition our department had spent 6 months preparing. Nobody noticed the framed painting leaning carefully against my legs, or the small velvet box hidden inside the pocket of my navy jacket. They certainly didn't know that in less than 5 minutes, I had planned to ask Ethan to stop calling me his best friend and finally let me become something more. I had rehearsed those words for weeks. Every version sounded awkward. Every version made my heart race. But all of them ended with the same hope that maybe, after 2 years together, he was finally ready to say yes. Instead, fate answered first. One phone call, one familiar name, one choice that took him away before I could even speak. I watched Ethan disappear into the crowd without looking back once. Maybe he thought I would understand. Maybe he assumed I would wait. After all, I always had. I waited through late-night photography meetings that somehow included Lucas. I waited through conversations that always circled back to memories from freshman year before I even knew Ethan existed. I waited through every moment when I convinced myself that loving someone meant being patient enough to come second. Standing there beneath strings of white festival lights that suddenly felt too bright, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't even crying. The ache inside my chest had become so quiet that it almost sounded like peace. My phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit up the screen. One message. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything. I stared at the words until they blurred, then slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Around me, volunteers began taking down decorations because the celebration had ended before it ever really began. A little girl who had wandered over from the family open house smiled at my painting and told her father it looked lonely. He smiled politely, thanked me for sharing my work, and walked away holding her hand. I looked down at the velvet box, turned it over once in my palm, then quietly dropped it into the nearest trash can. The sound it made was almost nothing at all. No dramatic music, no tears, no final speech. Just a soft click that disappeared beneath another wave of applause for the boy everyone believed had done the right thing. That was the moment I stopped waiting for Ethan Brooks. The strange part wasn't that he left me behind. The strange part was realizing that by the time he finally turned around to look for me, there would be nothing left to find. The funny thing about memories is that they never ask for permission before walking back into your life. 2 years earlier, before applause sounded like heartbreak and silence felt heavier than words, Ethan Brooks crashed into my world carrying 3 cameras, 2 overstuffed backpacks, and exactly 0 awareness of personal space. It happened on the first Monday of freshman orientation. I had been sitting outside the Fine Arts building, sketching the old clock tower while pretending not to feel completely overwhelmed by a campus that stretched farther than I could see. A shadow fell across my notebook. Before I could look up, someone tripped over the leg of my folding stool, stumbled forward, and accidentally scattered hundreds of printed photographs across the sidewalk. "Please tell me none of those landed in the fountain," he groaned. I looked up just in time to see warm brown eyes staring back at me with equal parts embarrassment and hope. Without saying a word, I knelt beside him and started gathering photographs before the wind carried them away. There were pictures of autumn trees, crowded football games, sleepy coffee shops, and strangers laughing without realizing someone had captured the moment forever. Every photograph felt alive. "You actually know how to hold them," he laughed as I carefully stacked them by the edges. "Most people grab the middle and leave fingerprints everywhere." I smiled for the first time that week. Artists have weird habits too. He extended his hand with a grin that somehow made the entire intimidating campus feel smaller. Ethan Brooks. Photography major. I shook it. Ryan Miller. Fine arts. Looks like we are neighbors, he said, pointing toward the building behind me. Guess you were stuck with me now. Neither of us realized how true those words would become. From that day on, we drifted toward each other with the effortless rhythm only college life seems capable of creating. We studied together in the library until closing announcements chased us outside. We survived impossible midterms fueled by vending machine snacks and coffee that tasted more like determination than flavor. We wandered through campus after midnight talking about everything from childhood dreams to ridiculous conspiracy theories about why squirrels always look like they were late for class. Ethan carried his camera everywhere. I teased him that he probably photographed his breakfast before eating it. He claimed every ordinary moment deserved a chance to become unforgettable. Somehow, I ended up becoming his favorite subject. Not because I posed well. I absolutely did not. He always laughed whenever I noticed the lens and immediately looked away. Stop hiding, he would say while lowering the camera just enough for me to relax. The best pictures happen when people forget they are being seen. Months passed so naturally that I stopped remembering what college had felt like before Ethan. People around campus started assuming we were together. Neither of us corrected them. It was easier to smile and let them believe whatever they wanted than explain something neither of us had ever defined. Looking back, I realized there was one photograph Ethan never showed anyone else. Every now and then, when he thought I was distracted, he would quietly unlock his phone and stare at an old picture for several seconds before slipping it back into his pocket with a distant smile. Whenever I asked who it was, he always answered the same way. Just someone who mattered once. I never pushed for more. Love has a dangerous habit of convincing people that unanswered questions are safer than honest answers. I told myself the past was only the past. I believed that whatever had happened before me had already ended. I did not know I was slowly falling in love with someone whose heart had never completely come home. By the beginning of sophomore year, Ethan and I had settled into a routine that felt so natural I stopped questioning whether happiness was supposed to be this easy. Every Tuesday morning, he waited outside my first class holding 2 cups of coffee, one loaded with caramel, because he insisted my life was already serious enough without drinking black coffee. Every Friday night, we wandered through the student art gallery after everyone else had gone home, making up ridiculous stories about paintings neither of us understood. He laughed with his entire body, throwing his head back without caring who stared, and somehow that laugh became the sound I looked forward to more than anything else on campus. If someone had asked me then what love looked like, I would have pointed toward those ordinary moments instead of grand gestures. Love looked like remembering someone hated mushrooms on pizza. Love looked like waiting outside the library because you knew they studied until closing. Love looked like taking hundreds of photographs of the same person simply because every smile felt a little different from the last. Then Lucas Carter came back. His name appeared so quietly that at first it barely seemed important. One afternoon, while Ethan and I were hanging photographs for the upcoming Spring Arts Festival, his phone buzzed across the table. I was balancing on a small ladder, trying to straighten a frame that refused to cooperate, when I glanced down and noticed the change in his expression. It happened in less than a heartbeat. His easy smile disappeared. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes froze on the screen as though the message had reached through the glass and grabbed him. "Everything okay?" I asked. Ethan blinked twice before forcing a smile that looked nothing like his real one. "Yeah, just someone from high school." He slipped the phone into his pocket so quickly that I almost believed him. Almost. Over the following weeks, tiny changes began collecting like dust in the corners of a room. They were easy to ignore one at a time, but impossible to miss altogether. Ethan started checking his phone during conversations. Sometimes he drifted away in the middle of my stories, apologizing only after I stopped talking. He canceled movie nights because something unexpected had come up. He arrived late to dinner carrying the distant expression of someone who had physically shown up but left his thoughts somewhere else. I kept telling myself college was stressful. Midterms were exhausting. Photography competitions demanded long hours. There had to be a reasonable explanation because the alternative frightened me too much to consider. One rainy evening, we ducked into our favorite coffee shop just off campus after getting caught in a sudden downpour. Ethan disappeared to pick up our drinks while I searched for an empty table near the window. His phone vibrated where he had accidentally left it beside his camera bag. I had no intention of looking. I truly did not. But the screen lit up before I could look away. One message appeared across the lock screen. Thank you for answering. I knew you would never ignore me. I missed you. Lucas. My heartbeat did something strange. Not faster. Slower. Like even my heart needed an extra second to understand what my eyes had already read. Ethan returned carrying 2 steaming cups, smiling as though nothing in the world had changed. I smiled back just enough to keep the moment alive. Sometimes the hardest part about loving someone is pretending you did not just watch a crack spread across everything you believed was unbreakable. Outside, rain slid down the window in quiet silver lines, blurring the campus lights into soft watercolor streaks. I remember thinking that glass and trust must have been invented by the same person, because once either one begins to crack, it never reflects the world quite the same way again. The Spring Arts Festival arrived wrapped in warm sunshine and impossible expectations. Colorful banners stretched across the campus lawn, local musicians filled the afternoon with familiar songs, and every department proudly displayed months of work for students, families, and alumni. The Fine Arts building had never looked more alive. My paintings lined the main gallery, each one carefully arranged beneath soft lights that Ethan had personally helped me adjust the night before. He had insisted every frame deserved to be perfect because, in his words, this was the beginning of everything I had dreamed about since freshman year. I believed him. More importantly, I believed us. Hidden inside my backpack was a small velvet box I had carried for 3 days without finding the courage to open again. It did not hold a ring meant for a dramatic proposal or a promise that would solve every problem overnight. It simply held a silver band engraved with the coordinates of the bench where Ethan and I first shared coffee during orientation. It was my quiet way of saying that whatever the future looked like, I wanted him standing beside me. Just before the exhibition officially opened, Ethan adjusted the collar of my shirt and smiled. After today, everyone is going to know your name. I laughed. Only if you promise not to take embarrassing pictures while I am talking. He lifted his camera with a playful grin. No promises. For a brief moment, everything felt exactly the way it used to. Then his phone rang. I watched the color drain from his face before he even answered. He stepped a few feet away, speaking so softly that I could not hear the conversation, but I saw enough. His hand trembled. His breathing became uneven. When he turned back toward me, his eyes carried the same distant look I had seen growing stronger for weeks. Ryan, he began, struggling to find the right words. Lucas needs me. Time slowed in the cruelest way. Around us, students continued laughing, visitors admired paintings, and somewhere outside, applause erupted for a dance performance. The festival kept moving while my world quietly stopped. Just give me an hour, Ethan said. I will come right back. I promise. I searched his face for the certainty I had trusted for 2 years, but all I found was urgency, pulling him somewhere I could never follow. I nodded because I loved him too much to become another reason he felt guilty. Go, I whispered. He squeezed my shoulder for barely a second before running through the gallery doors without looking back. I stood there holding the speech I had memorized, the silver band still hidden inside my backpack, and the strange hope that he would return before I lost the courage to tell him everything. 1 hour became 2. The afternoon faded into evening. Families drifted home carrying brochures and souvenirs, while volunteers quietly folded tables and stacked empty chairs. Professors congratulated me on the exhibition, telling me how proud I should feel, yet every compliment echoed through an emptiness I could no longer ignore. My phone remained silent until the sun had almost disappeared behind the library. Finally, a single message appeared on the screen. I am sorry. I cannot leave him right now. I will explain later. I read those words again and again until they no longer felt like a surprise. They felt like confirmation. Without saying anything to anyone, I opened my backpack, looked at the silver band resting inside its velvet box, and closed the lid one final time. At that moment, I understood something love rarely teaches until it is too late. Being chosen second often begins with accepting it the first time. The next morning, the campus looked exactly the same, which somehow made everything feel worse. Students hurried between classes with backpacks slung over one shoulder. Professors carried stacks of papers across the quad, and the coffee shop near the library still smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans. The world had not changed overnight. Only mine had. Ethan called 3 times before noon. I watched his name appear on my screen until it stopped ringing, then slipped my phone back into my pocket without listening to a single voicemail. By the afternoon, his messages became longer. He apologized. He promised there was an explanation. He insisted everything had happened too fast. None of the words answered the only question that mattered. When I needed him most, why was choosing me never the first decision he made? 2 days later, Ethan found me outside the Fine Arts building just as I was packing my sketchbooks into my backpack. He looked exhausted, as though sleep had become something he remembered instead of something he actually experienced. "Ryan, please," he said carefully. "Can we talk for 5 minutes?" I studied his face, searching for the person who used to laugh over burnt coffee and blurry photographs. He was still standing in front of me, but somehow he felt miles away. "You already made your choice," I answered quietly. "There is nothing left to explain." He stepped closer. "Lucas needed someone. I could not just walk away." I nodded slowly because I already knew that was true. "I never asked you to walk away from him." My voice remained calm, almost surprisingly calm. "I only hoped that for once, you would not walk away from me." Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Silence settled between us, heavy enough to erase every memory that had once made this campus feel like home. After a long moment, he whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you." I smiled gently, not because I believed him, but because I finally understood something about pain. Most people do not mean to break someone else's heart. They simply protect the one they cannot let go of. "I know," I replied. "That is what makes it so difficult." I walked past him before either of us could say anything else. He did not try to stop me. Over the next several weeks, I quietly began rebuilding my life one decision at a time. I transferred to a different studio section across campus. I resigned from the photography club where every hallway reminded me of Ethan's laughter. I moved into another residence hall on the opposite side of the university, telling everyone I simply wanted a shorter walk to my morning classes. My friends accepted the explanation because it sounded practical. Only I knew I was measuring distance in memories instead of miles. Then, one rainy evening, while organizing supplies in my new studio, an email arrived from a university in Boston. I had almost forgotten about the scholarship application my professor encouraged me to submit months earlier. My hands trembled as I opened the message. "Congratulations. I had been awarded a full scholarship for an advanced visual arts program beginning the following academic year." For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than sadness. It was not happiness yet. It was possibility. I leaned back in my chair and stared through the rain-covered window, realizing that every plan I had built around Ethan had quietly disappeared. In the empty space they left behind, another future had begun waiting for me. And for the first time since the festival, I wondered what my life might become if I finally stopped waiting for someone else to choose me first. The months that followed did not heal me all at once. Healing never arrives like fireworks. It comes quietly, disguised as ordinary mornings when you suddenly realize the memory that once ruined your day only stayed in your mind for a few minutes. I buried myself in classes, accepted every extra project my professors offered, and spent long evenings inside the studio where the smell of fresh paint slowly replaced the memories that had once followed me everywhere. My classmates joked that I had become impossible to find unless someone checked the fine arts building after dark. They were right. Creating something with my own hands gave me a kind of peace that conversations no longer could. By the end of the semester, my paintings had earned recognition beyond the university. Local galleries invited me to participate in small exhibitions, professors recommended me for additional grants, and the scholarship in Boston no longer felt like a distant dream. For the first time since freshman year, my future belonged entirely to me. Ethan, however, refused to disappear as easily as the memories I was trying to leave behind. It started with a cup of caramel coffee waiting outside my classroom. No note, no name. He knew I would recognize it anyway. The next day, I found one of my favorite sketch pencils carefully placed beside my easel after class. A week later, he was standing outside the library holding a familiar camera around his neck, looking almost nervous when our eyes met across the sidewalk. "Ryan," he called gently. "Can we talk?" I stopped walking but kept several feet between us. "You have already asked that before." He nodded. I know. I just, I need another chance. His voice sounded different now. Quieter. Less certain. The confidence that had once made everyone gravitate toward him had been replaced by someone who seemed unsure of every step. Lucas and I are not together, he admitted after a long silence. We realized we were holding on to memories instead of each other. I listened without interrupting. Months earlier, those words would have changed everything. Now they only sounded like information. I am sorry, he continued. I finally understand what I did to you. I looked at him for several seconds before answering. Do you? He lowered his eyes. I think so. I smiled politely, the same smile I now offered strangers during gallery openings. Then I am glad you understand. Confusion crossed his face. That is all. What else were you expecting? He searched for the right answer, but never found one. I realized then that Ethan still believed understanding his mistake would somehow return us to the people we used to be. He did not realize those people no longer existed. Ryan, he whispered, I miss you every day. The words hung between us with nowhere to go. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, not even relief. Only a calm that surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise him. I believe you, I answered honestly. But missing someone is not the same as choosing them when it mattered. His shoulders dropped as though those words carried more weight than any accusation I could have made. I adjusted the strap of my portfolio and stepped around him toward the parking lot. Before I walked away, I turned back one last time. I truly hope you find happiness, Ethan. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something else, but the silence reached him first. As I continued across campus beneath the golden light of early evening, I realized I had finally become someone I never thought I could be. I was no longer the person waiting for Ethan Brooks to come back. I was simply moving forward, and for the first time, I did not need him to follow. People often believe the hardest part of losing someone is watching them walk away. They are wrong. The hardest part is discovering how much of your future quietly disappeared with them without you ever noticing. 2 weeks before graduation, I stayed late in the Fine Arts building preparing my final portfolio review. Most of the campus had already emptied for the evening, leaving only the faint sound of air conditioning and distant footsteps echoing through the hallways. As I packed my brushes into a canvas bag, someone knocked gently on the open studio door. It was Emma Dawson, the one person who had watched my relationship with Ethan unfold from the very beginning. She stepped inside holding a worn cardboard storage box with my name written across the top in faded black marker. I found this while helping the photography club clean out their storage room, she said softly. I think it belongs to you. I frowned. I have never seen that box before. Emma hesitated before placing it on the table between us. Actually, Ethan asked me to keep it after the festival. He never opened it. I do not think he even knew what was inside. The room suddenly felt much quieter. I slowly lifted the lid. Resting on top was the same velvet box I had hidden inside my backpack the day everything fell apart. Beneath it lay a carefully folded letter, a small sketchbook, and an envelope containing a printed copy of my scholarship acceptance that had never been mailed. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter I had written more than a year earlier. The ink had faded slightly, but every word still carried the hope of someone who believed love could solve every uncertainty. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you that every version of my future includes you. I was offered a full scholarship in Boston today. Everyone expects me to accept it, but if your dream keeps you here, I would rather build a new dream beside you than chase one without you. I do not need a perfect life. I only need to know we are choosing it together. I stopped reading because the words had become too familiar. They belonged to someone I barely recognized anymore. Emma quietly reached into the box and handed me the silver band engraved with the coordinates of our first meeting place. He never saw any of this, she whispered. After he left that day, one of the volunteers found your backpack behind the exhibition table. They thought it belonged to the photography club because Ethan helped organize the event. It ended up in storage by mistake. I closed my eyes for a moment, realizing how differently our lives might have unfolded if one ordinary cardboard box had reached the right person at the right time. Before I could say anything, another voice echoed from the hallway. What box? Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his camera hanging forgotten at his side. His eyes moved from Emma to the letter in my hands, then to the silver band resting on the table. Confusion slowly gave way to disbelief. Ryan, he whispered. What is all this? Emma looked at me, silently asking whether I wanted to answer. I simply placed the letter back inside the box and gently pushed it toward Ethan. "It is the life we almost had," I said quietly. "The one neither of us ever got the chance to see." He stared at the box as though it contained every missing piece of the past, but neither of us reached for it. Some truths arrive years too late, and even when they finally find the right person, they cannot return the time they already stole. Graduation morning arrived beneath a cloudless blue sky that made the campus look exactly the way it had the day I first met Ethan Brooks. White chairs stretched across the football field, proud families filled the bleachers, and graduates wandered through the crowd adjusting gowns and laughing about memories they promised never to forget. I stood near the fine arts department with my diploma folder tucked beneath one arm, watching classmates take photographs that would soon become reminders of a life we could never return to. Boston was only 3 weeks away. My apartment lease had been signed. My flights were booked. For the first time in years, every chapter ahead belonged entirely to me. I thought the hardest goodbye would be leaving the campus that had shaped me. I was wrong. Just as the university president stepped away from the microphone after welcoming everyone, another voice echoed across the stadium. "Before today ends, there is something I need to say." Hundreds of heads turned at once. Ethan stood near the center aisle holding a wireless microphone that one of the event coordinators had reluctantly handed him after several minutes of quiet pleading. His hands trembled so noticeably that even students sitting rows away could see it. "I know this is not part of the ceremony," he began, taking a slow breath. I lowered my eyes, already knowing where his words were leading. He continued anyway. "I recently discovered a letter I was never supposed to miss. I learned that while I was chasing memories, someone was willing to give up his biggest dream just so we could stay together. I never even knew. That mistake will stay with me for the rest of my life." A quiet murmur spread through the audience before fading once more. Ethan took one careful step forward. "Ryan Miller," he called, his voice breaking with honesty rather than desperation. "I am not asking you to erase the past. I am not asking you to pretend I did not fail you. I only want you to know that if I could relive one day of my life, I would walk back into that art gallery, stay beside you, and choose you before anyone else." Every eye in the stadium shifted toward me. Months earlier, I would have given anything to hear those words. Standing there now, I felt only gratitude for the person I had become after surviving without them. I slowly walked toward Ethan until only a few feet separated us. His hopeful expression reminded me of the young man who had once tripped over my folding stool during freshman orientation. I smiled warmly because despite everything, I no longer carried resentment. "Thank you," I said softly enough that the microphone barely needed to amplify my voice. "Hearing that means more than you know." Hope returned to his eyes for the briefest second. Then I gently continued. "But the person who needed those words stopped waiting a long time ago. I forgave you because I wanted peace, not because I wanted the past back. Some doors do not close because of anger. They close because the person on the other side finally learned how to keep walking." Ethan lowered his head, accepting my answer before I had even finished speaking. Around us, the audience remained silent, not because they were disappointed, but because some endings are too honest to interrupt with applause. 5 years later, I returned to the university for the first time, not as a student searching for direction, but as an artist invited to open my newest exhibition inside the same fine arts building where everything had once fallen apart. The hallways looked smaller than I remembered, yet every familiar corner carried echoes of a younger version of myself who had believed love alone could shape an entire future. My paintings now traveled across the country. My work had been featured in galleries from Boston to Seattle, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped measuring my life by the people who stayed or left. Instead, I measured it by the dreams I finally allowed myself to follow. The exhibition filled quickly with students, faculty members, and local visitors. They paused in front of each canvas, quietly interpreting colors that had once been created from heartbreak, but now spoke more about hope than loss. Near the center of the gallery stood the final piece of the collection, a large painting of the old campus clock tower during autumn, surrounded by scattered photographs gently blending into brushstrokes. The title simply read, "The Seasons We Could Not Keep." I watched strangers smile at it without knowing they were looking at the story of my first love. As the evening slowed, The crowd gradually thinned until I noticed a familiar figure standing alone in front of the painting. Ethan Brooks looked older in the gentle way time changes kind people. His hair was slightly shorter, his posture calmer, and the camera that had once never left his shoulder now rested quietly in his hands instead of around his neck. He turned when he sensed me approaching and offered the same warm smile that had introduced itself beside a folding stool years ago. "Congratulations," he said. "It is beautiful." I smiled back. "Thank you for coming." For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no awkwardness left between us, only the peaceful silence of two people who had finally stopped arguing with the past. Ethan looked back at the painting. "I recognized the bench in the corner," he said softly. "The one where we shared coffee during orientation." I nodded. "Some places deserve to be remembered." He laughed quietly. "I spent years wondering what our life would have looked like if I had stayed that day." I looked at the painting instead of at him. I wondered too. He took a slow breath before asking the question that had apparently followed him through every season since graduation. "Do you think we would have been happy?" I considered the question carefully because it deserved an honest answer. For a while, I replied with a gentle smile. But I do not think either of us was ready to become the person the other needed. We had to grow separately before we could understand what love was actually asking from us. Ethan lowered his eyes, then nodded as though those words finally settled something inside him that had remained restless for years. "I still carry regrets," he admitted. "Maybe I always will." "Regret is not always a punishment," I answered. "Sometimes it becomes the reason we choose better tomorrow." He looked at me for a long moment before extending his hand. This time there were no promises, no unanswered questions, and no dreams waiting to be sacrificed. I shook it with genuine gratitude. We smiled, wished each other well, and quietly walked toward different doors at opposite ends of the gallery. Just before stepping outside, I turned once more and saw Ethan pause beneath the old clock tower visible through the window, looking up at it with a peaceful expression I had never seen before. I smiled to myself and continued into the evening, realizing that my first love had not been the greatest chapter of my life after all. It had simply been the chapter that taught me the most important lesson of all. The right person will never ask you to become second in your own story, and the moment you finally choose yourself, every ending quietly becomes the beginning you were always meant to find.